Well, guys, the Evil Dead franchise is back in business. In just a little over 10 or so days, this movie will be coming to you in theaters on July 10th. And what we would like to do is give you our rankings of the top 5 Deadites throughout all the franchise, as we have watched every single movie this far in the franchise. Let's get into it. Ryan, what is your 5th place for the Deadites in this franchise?
So coming in at number 5, I have Jessica from Evil Dead Rise. So Jessica is the Deadite at the very beginning of the film, where she is the possessed cousin who we see who's laying on the floor, vomiting in the weird looking cabin, like the A-shaped cabin. So she ends up reciting Wuthering Heights, and while her cousin is reading the book, and you see that she begins to get these psychic abilities, because that's something that Deadites get. And her cousin is creeped out, and then she goes over to check on her, and then she starts throwing up, and then her cousin's trying to help her. All of a sudden, she rips her scalp off, and it's like, wow, this Deadite is not playing. And then to top it off, she goes out on the deck to where her cousin's boyfriend is playing with a drone, and she takes the drone, cuts herself up with it, jumps in the water. The cousin's boyfriend goes in to help her, and then she decapitates him and then rises out of the water, and we get that Evil Dead title card. And I thought that was probably one of the better Deadite performances, and that's why I have it as my number 5. So what about you, Kevin?
Coming in 5th place is no other than Linda. As you may recall from Evil Dead 1981, Linda is the girlfriend of Ash. So Linda becomes possessed during this movie, and at the end of the movie, we see her actually become possessed there, and she becomes a Deadite. She's creepy, she's giggling. We see her eyes turn white, and we see her try to stab and kill her own boyfriend at the particular time. And then we see her get out of her grave there once Ash buries her alive in the grave, and she comes to try to take him out. And then we get the iconic shovel scene that ends with her head being tossed around to and fro. So I really enjoyed her as a Deadite there, especially with the girlfriend dynamic. It was really spectacular there, especially for an early 1980s movie. Ryan, what's your number 4?
So coming in at number 4, I have Cheryl. So Cheryl is Ash's sister, and she is from the original Evil Dead. She is the first person to become a Deadite as we know of on screen. So she's the one that when they're sitting there playing the card game, she's naming the cards while she's looking out the window. I think the first one is Ace of Spades, and then there was one like Jack of Jacks, and then Queens. And she's naming every single card they draw out of the deck without even being over there. And then she turns around, and then that's when you get that Deadite face, and that camera zoom in to the face of the Deadite, and you get the wide eyes and everything. And then we hear the infamous "one by one we will take you all," or take your souls, or as they say. So that Deadite performance was good. With it being the first, the issue is that as I said in our review, the voice that we hear from the demon does not match the lips of the person, the actress speaking, and that was an issue I had. And then she's floating, and it looks kind of weird. So that's why I have her as my number 4. So what about you, Kevin?
Coming in number 4 is Ash Williams. So we see in Evil Dead 2, 1987, that he becomes a Deadite toward the end of the movie, chasing around his particular companions there throughout the particular part of the movie. Now, the reason why I like this is sometimes we see in many horror movies that the antagonist can never be possessed. They always have an upper hand. They never get trapped by evil. But what this movie teaches us, that anyone can be possessed. Anyone can be conduit for evil. And I'm glad to see that was the case here. Not because it happened, but because Ash was able to overcome this Deadite spirit and get back to being the protagonist by the end of the movie. So that's my number 4. Ryan, what's your number 3?
So coming in at number 3, I have Mia from Evil Dead 2013. So Mia is one of the better Deadites of this franchise. She is definitely one of the scariest ones, and she has one of the higher body counts. She's doing things like cutting her tongue in half, biting people's arms, and vomiting all over people and stuff like that. And then doing things like even very brutal things like killing dogs and stuff. So she's definitely one of the scarier Deadites. Actress that played her, Jane Levy, did a tremendous job playing her, very good performance. Now, her body count isn't high enough for me to put her above number 3, so that's why I have to have her as number 3. So what about you, Kevin?
Coming in number 3 is Ellie from Evil Dead Rise 2023. So we understand that Ellie is the mother of 3 children, 2 young daughters and 1 young son. She's recently divorced or estranged from her marriage, but we also see that she's still keeping a positive attitude, still supporting her children, even though her spouse has left her to dry. I enjoyed this particular movie, especially her characterization as a Deadite, because what we see happen in this empathetic mother who loves her children become the very evil that takes out or attempts to take out all of her children. She is successful with taking out 2 of those children in this particular movie, but we do see that the youngest girl does survive with Ellie's younger sister. So I enjoyed her performance, the way that she would move around, especially when the youngest girl would go to the door and look at the peephole and see her mother was taking out all these other individuals when she was a Deadite. Was a great job. We also see her on the ceiling and walking around, and we know that the actress Alyssa Sutherland used her prior background as a ballerina to show the physicality of this role as a Deadite. For that reason, she is my number 3 in this particular tier count. Ryan, what is your number 2?
So coming at number 2, I have Henrietta from Evil Dead 2. So those of you who don't know, Henrietta is the wife of the archaeologist, Professor Raymond Noby. So essentially, he's the guy we hear on the audio tapes or the recordings in Evil Dead 2. And then Henrietta is the one that is in the cellar, in that fruit cellar in that movie. And one of the notable kills she does is she kills Jake, pulls his legs into the bottom of the cellar, and then you see that blood geyser, all that blood just spraying everywhere. And I thought that was pretty brutal and very Sam Raimi-esque. So it was one that I had to put up as my number 2. And then she also can shift a little bit, like her head, she can move it around like a snake and stuff. So that's a pretty scary looking Deadite, especially if we were to get a version in modern filmography. That would definitely be very scary and intimidating. So I have her as my number 2. What about you, Kevin?
So my number 2 is Jessica from Evil Dead Rise 2023. So she was in the opening scene, as Ryan mentioned previously in this particular tier count. She was in the room, and then you see one of her friends or so come into the room, and she can never see, you see the back of her head there. At first you see her sleeping and looks like she's sick, she's ill, and then you see her kneeling, I believe, on the ground there in the back of her head, and you hear her starting to say the phrases and quoting the very book that her friend is reading there from Wuthering Heights. And it was interesting because of the silliness before the actual carnage ensues. I thought was funny. It made it a comedic moment at that particular time. And then she goes into business by ripping off the scalp of her friend and then going outside, grabbing the drone, cutting herself with it, falling into the lake, and then the boyfriend rushing after her, she killing the boyfriend, and then rising from the water, and we get our title card. That scene was perhaps the most impactful scene of this particular franchise. The only other one I can think of that runs even close to this one was the opening scene in Evil Dead 2013, where you have the young teenage girl that gets caught in the woods, and then when she is about to be taken out by her own father for killing her mother, we hear the viciousness and hideousness of the Deadite appear there. So that's my number 2. Ryan, what's your number 1?
So my number 1 is Mommy's with the Maggots now. So no other than Ellie from Evil Dead Rise. So those of you know that famous quote, Mommy's with the Maggots now, when Ellie is fully possessed, full Deadite, in the bathtub in the LA apartment, and she's just looking up out of the water with her hands on the edge of the bathtub, and you can see the demonic looking nails where they're black and ugly looking, and then she gives that creepy grin. That was one of the best Deadite performances I have seen. It was one of the scariest looking ones. The practical effects look great, the eyes and everything, like the contact lenses, and then even the red, down to the red looking edges around the eyes. All of that was pretty scary looking. And then just a lot of the words and dialogue that the character gives during the film is very creeping. And he's saying things, very demonic things, like telling people, calling her children titty sucking parasites and stuff like that, and then ripping out people's eyeballs. And then the scariest part, as I mentioned in our review of this, was when the little girl, like Kevin was saying, was looking through the peephole in the door, and then you see the neighbor come up who's already missing his eyeball because she tore his eyeball out. And then she comes behind him and then just rips his neck out like it's a chicken, like a turkey neck or something, just wrings his neck right there. So that, man, Alyssa Sutherland did a very good job as a Deadite. I'd like to see her come back to the franchise in the future. I know we have a couple of films coming with Evil Dead Burn, as Kevin mentioned, comes out July 10th. And then we already have Evil Dead Wrath in production. So yeah, my number one. What about you, Kim?
So my number one is Mia Allen from Evil Dead 2013. This particular character was played by Jane Levy. She did a phenomenal job. As I've told several times in the past, a lot of us are in how well of a job that Navarrete did with her performance as Nikki in Obsession. So if you like such performances, I would ask you to go, if you haven't already, and watch this particular movie, Evil Dead 2013, especially because of the fact that we have another Evil Dead Burn coming out in July. So go and watch it if you haven't already. So moving along here. So Mia is suffering from being an addict. She's been an addict for a while. Heroin, I believe, was her choice of drugs. And her mother has died. She has her brother there with her. I believe his name is David. And they're all hanging out together in the cabin in the woods. Now, the thing about Mia is that we know that she's problematic because of her addiction. Is the focal point of the entire first act of this particular movie outside of the opening scene. And I liked how this particular performance by Jane Levy, how she is able to showcase the vulnerability of Mia as a character. And then we see her become a Deadite and become possessed, and we see the evilness ensue. We love this character, but at the same time are rooting against this character. So we're humans at odds. On the one hand, we want to see her successful. On the other hand, we see that she's been possessed. And for that reason, we can no longer root for her, which leaves us in a dilemma. Now, I enjoyed the very end of this movie where we see her fight herself, showing that sometimes the battle is the war within. And so her performance in this movie, from all the different shots, the vomiting of the blood onto one of her fellow companions towards the beginning, first act, all the way to the end where the other version of herself becomes this cesspool of blood. I enjoyed this particular movie. I enjoyed Jane Levy's performance here, and I have Mia as my number one Deadite. So guys, we would like to know, who is your number one Deadite of the Evil Dead franchise? Give us your ranking of your top 5 Deadites in this franchise in the comment section below. So Ryan, what will we be working on?
So we're working on the opening sequences, like the top opening sequences of Evil Dead franchise and more tier counts.
Well, guys, remember, Fright Fam, be watchful.